This is my fourth time watching it over the last few days, and I still find it mind-blowing. My brain's still trying to take it in.
I promise. Well, I was somewhere around probably, 16 years into doing this work. And I was developing the why work the first 10 years or so that I did this work. And then I was about 6 years into the course's way of saying it. So it'll take, don't be concerned if you need 2 or 3 or 4 or 50 watches of it to go, oh, okay, now I got it. Because it's all about building brain cells. You know, you go back to Yeshua 2,000 years ago, and he says his teaching is only for those who have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. Now, I think we can safely assume probably most everybody in his audience have what we call eyes and ears. So he wasn't talking about that. He was saying for those who have the brain cells. And if you don't have the brain cells, your brain cannot produce a perception that matches what this means. And so many people will have a limited perception of what they just watched, and they'll go, oh, Michael, when you said, it's like, I didn't say that in any way, shape, or form. But that's what you heard. And listening is no different than seeing. Everything that you hear comes from brain cells. I have never said a word in my life, and neither have you. We call it saying words, but you know, the truth is I have a little flap of skin here in my throat. And my parents, like your parents, taught you how to vibrate that flap of skin, which means you pass air over it at a certain rate of modulation. And it produces a thing we call words. According to what brain cells contain, those words seem to have meanings. If we agree on the meanings of those words, we say, now that's actuality. And the truth is, all it is an agreement that we all went, okay, that flap of skin moving, you know, what really happens is flap of skin moves, creates movement in air molecules moving hit the eardrum. You know, it doesn't matter if you're in England and I'm in Virginia, my little flap of skin moving right now causes a little piece of plastic in my computer to vibrate. That vibration creates an electrical signal that then is set up into a tower, and it gets moved across the ocean, and it hits a tower there, and that vibration moves to your computer or your phone, however you're watching this, and that causes another little piece of plastic in your phone to vibrate and moves air molecules. Those air molecules move a drum in your ear. The drum in your ear converts to an electrical signal, and your brain goes, oh, I heard Michael say. You've never heard a word anybody has said in your life. You've heard what fires in your brain cells. You've seen what's fired in your brain cells. The idea of the course is to learn to forgive, to learn to remove the inaccurate covers that we put over the world. How do you tell if something's inaccurate? There's an infallible signal that your structure has that will tell you when your perception, whether it's your listening or your tasting or your touching. I have fun with my granddaughter. She's 4, and we've been teaching her this. And one day, back a few weeks ago, she created a piece of art at school. And so the art was puff paint, and it was a snowman. And we said, well, gee, that doesn't look like a snowman for me. That looks like, and I don't remember what it was, but it looks like this. And so she goes, oh, I have this reality and you have a different reality. And we ended up we made a game out of it. We probably spent 45 minutes or an hour playing in the car, making up realities about this piece of paper. We turned it sideways. Well, what's your reality now? What's your reality now? And we get to the point after a little while, are you saying, well, let's see what other realities we can find. So at 4, she knows reality is the output of her mind. We were watching, I've shared this in the course, or in the Why Is This Happening to Me Again book study, but back a few months ago, she's really into anatomy and physiology. She knows at 4 she's going to be a doctor, and she wanted to watch a particular video on the body, on anatomy video. She'll spend 45 minutes, an hour sitting just glued to the television screen watching anatomy and physiology videos. And in this one particular one, it's a kid's anatomy video, and there's a cartoon outline of a character, and all the organs in the body are there, and they all kind of fall out on the ground in order of size, the smallest parts to the larger parts. And each part of the anatomy sings a song to the child about what it does. So the eyes, it's their turn, so they raise up to sing. And they sing, I am your eyes, I am your eyes, I see the world around you. Arya looks at himself, Papa, they don't understand, do they? We see with our brain, not with our eyes. How different would my life have been if I'd have known that at 4? How different will your life be when you know that every reality that you hold is a meaning that you give, and the infallible marker that tells you that your reality, the perceptual construct of your mind, is in error, is there's hostility or fear attached. If it's not accompanied by love, it's not true. It may be your truth, it may be your experience, but remember, the single flat plane for the two-dimensional creature doesn't exist, except as a construct of the mind. Hostility or fear attached to any construct in your mind tells you that that is something you want to be forgiving, that you want to remove from your mind. And the technology was created 2,000 years ago for how to do that. That's the basis of the why work. There are only 2 places on the planet that I've found an exact and specific definition for how to collapse perception and how to heal it. One of them is those ancient writings from 2,000 years ago, only in the ancient Aramaic language, not in the Greek language, and in A Course in Miracles. Only 2 places I've seen it. I've looked everywhere in the last 50 plus years. 2 places I've seen it. They must come from the same source. And the Course specifically shows, just like the Aramaic did, how to collapse false perception and how to bring it to healing. And that's the whole objective of this body of work that we're talking about, whether it's A Course in Miracles or my book, Why Is This Happening to Me Again, or anything else that we're in the process of doing. So I see Corey's hands up. Let's say hello to Corey. What's on your mind, Corey?
Oh, yeah. Oh, that was a lot. And also, I have a question because he said, or I also know that the situation changes when I, let's say, do something, and I did not really hear what he said or what you said. Does the situation change when I change my false thought about the situation and
remember that. I think I've got your question. So here would be my input. No situation is independent of you. You're involved in your life. I talked about the high energy waves that leave the mind. Somebody shows up to play it out. And then I made a whole list, the things that are going to change when you change this. Because we live in an energetic world, and our energetic world is organized. Break that word down. Organized, turned into organic structure, according to the energy patterns that we hold. And so when I change those patterns, again, the example I think I used there was if I hold a belief, I know there's 1,000 generations of my bloodline that knows that we're victims. This family system is always victimized. Then I hold an energy, and energy, remember, is motion, and I send out an energy wave that says, hey world, I'm supposed to be victimized. Can anybody victimize me? Somebody's going to show up. If I let go of that, then I can just as easily send out the energetic pattern that says, hey, I'm supposed to be nurtured and cared for and supported by all the world. Is there anybody that will show up and nurture and care for and support me? And guess what? Somebody's going to show up to do it. If they're not showing up to do it, and I go back to my old rage, my old fear, my old terror, there's my next forgiveness process. Because these things don't disappear like that. You don't do one forgiveness process. You don't do one worksheet and, oh, now everything changes. Because what you're dealing with is a pattern of generations and generations and generations and generations of whatever the family dynamic is. You might remember another metaphor. This is another story that explains it. There was this particular group of people, and back in the Old Testament, they got lost in the desert. Now, some people think that's supposed to be a literal story. If you believe that a very aware group of people who understand astronomy perfectly or understand astronomy quite deeply could possibly get lost in a 35 square mile area for 40 years, I've got a bridge for sale. You know, I mean, that's silly to think that it was about being lost in a hot, sandy place for 40 years. But when you understand that that word desert there is a code word for the unconscious, they're trying to explain. It's like, remember that whole text that we call, all of the texts, I don't care if it's Upanishads, I don't care if it's, you know, the Bible, I don't care if it's whatever it is, they're all stories trying to explain to the two-dimensional creature that there is no such thing as a series of flat planes separated by time. And those things get misinterpreted, and people with poor intentions, hostile and fearful people misinterpret and take advantage of people and hurt people with it. You know, there's all kinds of crazy stuff that goes on. But that story, if you remember that story of the desert, they were talking about two different places you can live. You can live in what was called the Promised Land. And the Promised Land, I would offer, is the land of conscious co-creation, where you get to set the energies up that produce your life, and you get to live there as you choose to. And then the other one is the desert, the unconscious. The unconscious set those things up. And if there are generations and generations and generations of pain and trauma in the unconscious, which for most of us, we come into a world of unconsciousness, then we get to play those things out. But remember what had to happen to that group of people to get out of the series of flat plains separated by time to be able to play basketball. What happened to get out of the desert? They said the old generation had to die off. Now that doesn't mean old people in old physical bodies had to physically die. The root of the word generation is genari. It means cause. All of the causes held in mind had to be removed to get out of the desert, out of creating your life unconsciously, into the Promised Land where you get to set a frequency up and life responds. And you get to play as a conscious co-creator. And so there'll be layer after layer after layer after layer to move through until those old causes are gone. And, you know, if you check in on the why work, or you check in on a larger body of my work, you know, the why book is still just scratching the surface. You'll see that we go in all kinds of different directions. Like, for instance, we do a lot of work with nutrition, right to the process of you can't heal if you don't eat food. And if you eat what people call, what shows up in the normal grocery store, if you eat what people call food, which is grown on dirt, it's not food. You've got to have soil to grow food. You can't heal if you don't eat food. And if people pour glyphosate on an acre of land and then force chemicals into these seeds so that what you buy in the store looks like food, that's not going to vitalize and strengthen you to heal. You need soil. Soil has organisms, it has life, and out of soil you get life, and out of life, food, you get strength and vitality. If your vitality isn't high enough, you can say, oh, I want to deal with this old rage thing in my life, boy, I want to get rid of that, but excuse me, the minute it starts to come, it's give me a fifth of scotch. No, I want a beer, give me a cigarette. Oh, let me have some sugar. Oh, I want ice cream, I want some junk food. Pardon me. And so that holds vitality down. Healing isn't going to happen. It's a holistic program that looks at every aspect of life, and you may have to revisit some of your core issues many, 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 many times before you're vital enough to really, truly process through them and move forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and a little bit is a question for me, even though there that comes from generation and generation. So let's say I'm aware now of a negative belief about myself.
Mm-hmm.
Then I need to deal with that now.
Yes.
And
that's what the worksheet process is about.
Yeah.
That's what the forgiveness process is about.
Yeah. Yeah. To go in that forgiveness process, right?
Yes.
With the worksheet.
Remember that Harvard tells us, there's some Harvard research that shows that in a time frame They take people in a laboratory, they hook them up to monitors, to electrical sensors, and they can measure 10,000 brain cells firing. So there are 10,000 measurable units of electrical activity happening in the brain. And then what they show is that in that time frame where they can measure those 10,000 units of electrical activity, the max amount of data that goes into building your reality, the output of your mind, 9 bits. 9 out of 10,000 brain cells firing. A very select bit of data shows up as your reality.
Mm.
And the core of forgiveness is, how do you collapse that reality so you can get a look at what's in the 10,000 that's underneath where the trauma is and bring that forward for healing? And that's what the worksheet does. And you might, as I say, have to do it many, many times. And you may do it 10 billion times, but if you never eat actual food, you'll probably never fully break through, whatever that is. Life will get better, but you're going to have to be at full vitality to really be able to process the deepest layers. So it takes expanding your awareness and the behaviors that you do into wider and wider understanding of what does it take to function fully as a human being. And here's what I would offer it's going to look like. The day this happens is the day that 7.5 billion people on planet Earth wake up one morning recognizing, oh, I am made of the stuff called love. The people that yesterday I thought were the enemy, my husband, my father, my mother, the government, whoever, are simply a projection of the pain and trauma that's within me. I'm going to heal the pain and trauma that's within me. Now with the new guidance system, I might go out and that person, maybe the person that I'm blaming for my pain maybe committed a crime. And in a state of connected awareness, I hold them accountable for their crime. I don't have to rage at them. I don't have to judge them. I can just say objectively, gee, you just committed a crime. And so what I'm going to do with love in my heart connected, I'm going to stay awake and alive as a human being, and I'm going to be responsible for you being held accountable for your crime. And now even that behavior brings me to a state of peace because I'm doing it out of my human life rather than out of generational patterns of pain and trauma.
Oh, yeah. That I understand.
Good. Awesome.
Thank you.
Right. Delighted, Corey. Glad you're here. Tina?
Thank you.
Yes, Doctor, I just want to thank you so much for your time and that incredible video. I followed your work and read your books, and also at Unity Church, much discussion about you, and there's a lot of book studies, so thank you so much.
Where
really
are you
appreciate
located?
it. I'm here in Austin, Texas.
Oh, cool. Been a long time. It's probably been 25 years since I spoke in Austin.
Oh, wow. Well, you need to make a return, especially at the Unity Church. We would love to have you.
We've got a granddaughter here now that's 4, and we raise her 2 to 3 days a week, so we don't travel very much anymore. We're sort of locked in here, having extended, in our center, which is in Missouri, we do total fresh and raw food when we do an intensive. And here, we've been here 4 years now. We stopped traveling, and we're doing gardens and doing more. This is what's kind of brought my understanding around to more about food. Like when people do an intensive with us, we have a private food-based Facebook page that people get access to, and it gives a whole series of recipes and how to start to shift the dietary regimen over to actual food instead of what the culture does. So we're still producing that, but not doing much traveling these days. We are available, though, as we're doing here. We do a lot of things on Zoom, so that's a possibility.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, definitely relay the message. That's incredible. Studying the Course as well as the Course in Love, right. And this pure consciousness, this Christ consciousness, I'm having a little bit of a difficulty with when you know that this world is not real and we're living in the illusions of the past and, and all the traumas of the past, and once we heal that, in the Bible, we grew up as a Christian, as Jesus says, as Yeshua says, take up the cross and follow me. Moses had his people. It kind of answered my question earlier, but in the promised land, how do we reach this promised land outside of this illusionary place that we're held here? And, are we supposed to find a type of job that's going to be pleasing to God in this new world? Or are we, because right now, after COVID-19, I was furloughed, and I'm having a little bit of a difficulty finding, now that I feel this oneness with everything and with God, am I supposed to seek a career to continue this love and this oneness? Or should I go back to technology? Or maybe God has a promised land for us in the end of this. I'm just a little confused about that, if it makes any sense.
So my take is, we're in it.
Yeah.
There's only one thing that takes us out of what was called the promised land. Again, it's just the land of conscious co-creation. And that's what's going on between our ears. That's what needs to be forgiven. And ultimately, when we discover who we are, we start to function out of our true purpose. If you go to my website under worksheets, you'll see a worksheet that we have in our workshop, Purpose, Personal Power, and Commitment. It's also a DVD that's in our catalog. And that shows people how to bypass the brainwash of the world and how to tap into what your real purpose is and begin to come into alignment with that and to function on purpose. And again, over layer by layer, well, let me say it differently. I've been doing this work on a personal level. What I've developed is an expression of the work I've done personally in my own study, and put it together in a way that hopefully makes sense so that other people don't have to make it all up on their own. Mm-hmm. And in doing that in 50 plus years, in terms of my own personal process, the deepest work that I've done has been done in the last 2.5 to 3 years, in 50 years of doing this work.
Wow.
So it's a practice. And as you discover your purpose and you come into alignment with it, when people don't know who they are, they can tend to become addicted to things, and there are things they want to do because they feel good or what have you, and they go off and they do them, and they find that they destroy themselves with it. Once they discover who they are and start to function on purpose, if those things don't support the state of being human, the state of being loved, they stop doing it. Mm-hmm. And what I've discovered, you sometimes end up starting to do things that you really don't like to do and really don't want to do, but because they support your purpose, you do them. So it becomes a process of waking up to the truth of who we are. And then, come from family systems. Like if you're the early adopter, I know for me and my family system, I can sort of imagine a certain level of understanding this work. My mother loved this work when I started to develop. She would come to Heartland and she just loved it. But I can't imagine anybody else in my bloodline, cousins, aunts, uncles, sisters, brothers, grandparents. I can't imagine anybody else even starting to be able to hear this conversation, let alone engage in it. There's nobody. Yeah. So I was the early adopter. And it's a challenge when you're the early adopter because most everybody looks at you like you're nuts.
Yeah.
I was fairly successful in a business. I had 3 businesses. I had about 60 employees back when I first started to come into this work, and I started to do it part-time. And one day I literally got up in the morning and had the guidance to walk away. And I locked the doors and I just walked away from those businesses and I went back to school. I actually had a penthouse apartment in one city. I had businesses in 3 different cities. I had homes in 3 different cities. I had an El Dorado on one side of my driveway and I had a Mark III on the other side of my driveway. Literally in a day, I gave it all up. And my family was like, "You're nuts." And I went back to school studying naturopathic medicine and moved in the direction of teaching this work full time. And I literally traded all that in. I had a bicycle that I went back and forth to school in, and I exchanged taking care of a small apartment building for a 1-room apartment that I lived in while I was going to school. Mm-hmm. My family was sure I was nuts. But I'll tell you what, I wouldn't trade 1 minute of all that stuff that I had for what I have now.
Right.
So it's, you know, and the challenges each goes through. I mean, everybody's challenge is going to be different. You know, the metaphor is a powerful way to be able to get to see, oh, that's some of what I might go through. But there's a lot for most everybody to go through to wake up.
And also really quickly, and thank you for that, that was incredible. And that's something that's happening to me now. The thing is that to discover our purpose, should we surrender and allow the Holy Spirit to guide us to this purpose, the gifts that God has in store for us even before we were born? Or do we have to seek our hearts to, I know I'm going to look at your website as well for our purpose, but I'm just kind of seeing what is my purpose in this next chapter of my life, which I know is solely to work with the Holy Spirit, and that's something that makes me come alive every morning. But sometimes I kind of get conflicted. Should I surrender and allow the Holy Spirit to guide me, or is it something that I have to seek?
Well, my offering would be that living out of your purpose means living out of your highest guidance in a state of being. It hasn't necessarily got to do with what you do in the world. You know, there's an old story about a film crew that went to a place where they're building a cathedral, and there's a guy who's wheelbarrowing stones up to this cathedral, or there are a number of workers, and the interviewer interviews the workers, and he says to one guy, so what are you doing? He says, I'm pushing this damned old wheelbarrow. And another one says, well, I'm putting these stones in place. And another one says, I'm building a cathedral to the glory of God. They're all doing the same thing. Where are you coming from is what purpose is really about.
Beautiful.
So as you know, that worksheet, and the worksheet's pretty self-explanatory. If you go to the website, you don't need the whole workshop to do it. It is in their catalog, but you know, it's pretty self-explanatory. And you know, we've been brainwashed. You'll remember in the ancient scriptures say, do not be molded by the world. In essence, they're saying, do not be molded by the world, or you'll end up moldy. It'll kill you if you buy into what the world feeds you. And so giving up the things that the world has forced onto us, and to be able to make that transition means you have to get out of a brainwash. And that purpose exercise, you know, the world has a purpose for you. We want you to be a good commercial servant. We want you to serve the commercial interests of the world.
Exactly.
And so most of us think, well, I went to school and I got my degree in, and now I'm a good commercial servant, so now I'm fulfilling my purpose. And that may be the exact opposite of what somebody's purpose is. And so somebody might start out and they're in something that's the opposite. And tomorrow they may end up doing the same thing. There's a good story that Ram Dass tells. I believe it was Ram Dass, if I'm remembering correctly. And there was a guy who came to know of Ram Dass, do some of his workshops, and he was a banker, a Wall Street banker. And he got into Ram Dass's work and realized that he was not where he was supposed to be. And he quit the bank. He was a pretty high-level banker. And he quit the bank. He was actually the vice president of a commercial bank on Wall Street. And for about 10 years, he became a hippie, you know, long hair hippie, you know, that was his life. And one day, Ram Dass tells a story, one day this fellow is in Manhattan, and he ends up running into the president of the bank. And he's in his long hair and hippie stage. And the bank manager says, you know, I would really love for you to come back. You were the best vice president of commercial loans I ever had. Would you come back? And the guy cut his hair and went back. But what he was doing when he went back was not being the vice president of commercial loans. He was using his position as a banker to teach the truth of who we are and what life is really about. So, you know, it's not so much about what you're doing, what your function is in the world, but what your purpose is and alignment with your purpose. So in one case, you know, being the commercial banker was just the worst thing he could ever think of. In the other case, he was able to bring the presence of love to people in the commercial banking world that otherwise would never touch it.
Perfect. Yeah, good answer. Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Such great insight. Thank you so much.
All right. I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. E-C-E-M? E-S-E-M? Oh, you must be muted. Can you hit your mute button?
Hello,
There you
my
go.
name is Ejam.
How do I pronounce your name?
Ejam. Hi, Michael. It was great, the video, and I am familiar of what you're talking about. So I have few questions, starting from some basic ones, and it will eventually go a little.
Go for it.
Okay. So at the first video, at the 3 minutes of days, talking about two-dimensional creature as human. So my first question is, why humans are two-dimensional if we're living in the world of 3 dimensions?
Well, my offering was that our analogy was the two-dimensional creature, and the basketball is 3-dimensional.
Okay.
I wasn't saying we're 2-dimensional, but that's an analogy that helps us to understand. And my offering is that, you know, if we listen to Einstein, Einstein says we live in at least a 4-dimensional world, and we're 3-dimensional creatures. So the inability of the 2-dimensional creature to play basketball and understand is due to the fact that they're short 1 dimension in perception. So my question of everyone is, are we 3-dimensional creatures living in a 4th dimensional world, and therefore are we limited by our lack of that 4th dimension? And when we open our higher minds, do we take on that 4th and actually move into being 4-dimensional creatures? So escape that trap.
I understand. I am also very interested in spiritual intelligence, what you are talking about, the tuning into higher dimension of understanding ourselves from a higher perspective. And my second question is, if the forgiveness is the essence of everything, why it's not at the pinnacle of the map of consciousness by David Hawkins instead of the enlightenment?
Rephrase that again. I didn't quite catch it.
I said, if the forgiveness is the essence of everything, and regarding to the teachings from David Hawkins, who came up with the map of consciousness.
Yes, I'm familiar with David's work.
Okay, so why it isn't, because you said the forgiveness is the pinnacle of the map, is the essence of everything. So my question is, why it's not at the pinnacle of the map of consciousness instead of enlightenment?
Well, my take is, I wouldn't say, you maybe heard me say that, but it didn't come out of my mouth, that forgiveness is at the pinnacle. I'm not suggesting that is true. What I'm saying is that's the tool for getting to the pinnacle. Actually, once you've moved past the 3-dimensional perspective of a 4-dimensional world, then the need for forgiveness disappears. It's actually gone. It's of no use whatsoever. Once we've achieved that state, then we're in the direct, whatever word you want to give it, whether it's enlightenment or whatever it is, we're there. And when we're there, forgiveness is no longer necessary. So it's only, forgiveness wouldn't be the objective or the pinnacle of life. It would simply be the key tool. One of the things the Course talks about forgiveness as is that forgiveness is the only single-edged sword. In other words, everything else that we do to get there can be turned and used against us, or we can use it against ourselves. Forgiveness is the only single-edged sword. It's the only thing that if you engage in it will keep you moving forward. And then once you've opened to that higher state, unless there are other hostility and fear-based realities within you to be forgiven, then you put the tool aside and it's not of any use anymore. It isn't a necessity. So I wouldn't offer that that's the pinnacle. I just offer that's the tool for going to, you know, one of the things the Course talks about is that truth cannot be spoken in words, and you need, what the Course is about is taking you to the experience. The experience then will become your guide. Forgiveness is just to move the trash out of the way.
Okay, I have another quick question. It's a little bit personal, but I've been thinking about it for over a couple of months, so it's the right person I did this space to ask. Personally, I have been, when I look at my past, I have been attracted for narcissistic abusive partners, and I am very highly sensitive.
Say that once again. I didn't quite hear you.
I said I have been attracting a lot of narcissistic abusive disorder partners who have narcissistic abusive partners.
Right.
So, as life is so paradoxical, I have two questions. One is, do I attract the one that I am also? Does it mean that I am narcissistic, abusive? I have the tendency of the narcissism, or because I am empath, I attract the completely opposite one, which I don't have. So the life brings to me.
Okay. So my take on that, a couple of things. First of all, what I hear people saying, and I don't know if this is what you mean by the word empath, so I'll get clear with it. What I've heard people over the years saying that they're empaths, they feel other people's feelings. So I feel your disturbance, so I'm disturbed. And my take is, that's just another form of denial. I may, being an empath, be able to feel what your feelings move in me, but I'm feeling what's moving in me. I can't feel yours. That's just not possible. It's like, a radio station sends out a signal, and I'm attuned to 900 on my radio, and the radio expresses what is sourced from within the radio that reflects what the energy is out there, because it's attuned to it. So if I'm feeling pain, I'm lying to myself when I say I'm feeling your pain. But if you approach me with a pain that matches my pain, then your pain can resonate my pain, and here I am in pain. And now I need to do forgiveness to free myself of that. When I free myself of that, then you can show up with pain, and I'll be aware of your pain. I'll be aware of the energy that's going on in you, and I'll be connected to love and in a state of peace. So that would be my take on the empath experience. Now, what lies in your history, if you're experiencing, and I would categorize the type of person you're talking about as someone somewhat abusive. So what's in your history, and it might be great-great-great-great-grandmother that was abused by a narcissistic husband. And that energetic pattern, if it's in your field, and you've dealt with most other things in your life and you're in a pretty clear space, you're sourcing that energy that says, okay, so I need an abusive narcissist to show up to heal this layer that I need to heal, to free my genes and to free my great-great-grandmother from that. And when I do, then that whole game changes. I remember working with a man back in Atlanta. This goes back 40 years ago. This was back when I first started working with the course. And he was an attorney, very successful his father was a very wealthy, well-known attorney in Atlanta. And he was very intellectually oriented. He was atheistic, and he was having some difficulties, and a physician that he knew suggested that he come and see me. Now, when you get this intellectual, successful atheist attorney that comes to see Michael Rice, there's obviously something going on that he's going to show up on my doorstep. And so I started to work with him, did some forgiveness work, and there's a process I've developed called still point breathing. So we did some of that work. And what showed up in the middle of his still point breathing session was an experience surfaced from within him that he categorized as what he would call a past life. Now, is the past life true? I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I've seen people who, when they've experienced what they call past life experiences, have had dramatic changes in their lives. Does that mean it's factual? No, it could be just the creative mind's way of presenting something to us so we could handle it. Again, it could be something genetic. In any event, he's working away in the still point breathing process, and he has a memory surface, an awareness surface of lying in a sarcophagus. And everybody around him, he becomes aware, thinks he's dead, but he's not. And his wife is there, and he knows that he has no signs of life, but he's alive, he's there. And he has the thought that if she's the only one that's going to be able to help bring him back, the only one, like his life depends on her. And if she leaves, he'll die. And so she left and he died. Now, this is a guy that's very intellectual, like tough attorney type, like a really high level attorney. And from a very wealthy, and as I say, atheistic family. After he goes through that death experience, I say to him, well, okay, so who are you? And all he can say, and we probably went through this, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 times. I don't know, but I am. Who are you? He's just gone through death. Who are you? I don't know, but I am. So we complete that session, and he leaves my office. Now, some of the things that he had shared with me that motivated him to come and see me, he had had 2 relationships in his life. One was a high school sweetheart, and one was a woman that he had been married to for 10 years and was currently in the process of a divorce. After that session, he realized that he had said many times that if this woman divorced him, he could not live. And their divorce had been in process for about 6 months, and he had been in such trauma that his business was failing, his bank account was empty, and he was on psychotropic medicines because he was so distraught. And when he completed this session, that was just relieved. He left the session, he shared with me a couple days later, he left the session and he had to go and get gasoline for his car. So he stopped just a few blocks from my office and got gasoline. He pulled into the gas station, and the woman he'd had his relationship with in high school was in the gas station getting gas. Now, this is 10 minutes after his session. He hasn't seen this woman since they were kids, and I guess he's probably 50 at this point. She's in the gas station, and they're able to connect sweetly. He leaves there. It's his day to be with his 2 children that he has with the woman that's divorcing him. He goes to her house to pick the children up, and normally she just sends the kids out to the car like she won't have anything to do with him. She actually opens the door and invites him in. First decent word she's had to say to him in the 6 months they've been separating. Oh, pardon me. Actually, there are 2 pieces to the puzzle. He goes to the mall. This is before that visit occurs. He goes to the mall, and she is, the woman that is divorcing him is going through the mall. Now, he's told me that he can't think of her or see her without just breaking down. He sees her at the mall. Now, this is from the gas station. He goes to the mall. He sees her, and he's able to say hi and how are you, and no response whatsoever. He just, acknowledges her, gives her a hug, and, moves on with no trauma whatsoever. Then he goes to pick up his children, and that's when his former wife, who he had divorced 10 years earlier, invited him into the house. Previously, she would send the kids out, and that would be it. Come in, and she hasn't had a decent word to say to him in 10 years since they've been divorced. And she comes over when he comes in the house and gives him a kiss on the cheek and says, hey, everything's really okay, isn't it? And the kids, they go off to dinner. Now, he's told me that his daughter has no use for him, and he hasn't touched his son since he was an infant. And I don't remember exactly, he's maybe 15 or 16 years old. They go out for dinner. After dinner, he's dropping them off at the house, and his daughter, who up to that point has no use for him, His daughter says, hey, Dad, how about if my boyfriend and I come over and cook dinner for you next week? And when he's dropping the kids off, his son, he said, now I haven't touched my son since he was a small child. He said, my son grabbed me and hugged me, and it was like he was never going to let go of me. Now, this is all within 5 hours of touching into this memory of being in a sarcophagus and knowing if this woman left him, he would die. So what do we need to deal with? And my offering is, what's happening for you right now? Are you breathing? What's moving for you? You want to mute your phone?
No, I am listening.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything moving inside at all?
I mean, a lot of things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, it just looked like there was maybe some process, some things were opening up. So just, we'll hold the space. In any event, you know, was it a past life? I don't know. I mean, I could easily explain that his mind just generated this whole thing, so this sarcophagus experience, so he could deal with some things. But everything around him changed. And these relations, I mean, this woman he hasn't seen since they're kids is there 5 minutes from my office. And this woman that he's divorcing, or is divorcing him, he has no trauma in seeing her. And, you know, his former wife welcomes him, and his kids hug him. And, you know, so why do these things come that are traumatic? Because there's something in me that needs to be resonated. And the purpose of life, my take is, life is about life. Life abhors death. And so if we're holding an energy with which we're killing ourselves, life is going to, through resonance, send us somebody to bring it up. When they do, we do one of two things. We project it into our brains, image them, and go, or we go, oh, look what's coming up for me, and I apply forgiveness to that, and I remove that, and I've received the gift that this seemingly traumatic experience has given me. Does that fit, make sense for you?
Yes, all of them.
Have you tapped into the forgiveness processes yet, the worksheet from Why Is This Happening to Me Again?
No, I'm just reading at the other side, but I haven't done it before. This is the first room I'm joining with you.
Great. Well, I'm glad you're here, and there are several Zoom sessions in Yinka's archives where we've walked somebody through that whole process. Toward the end of this video,
okay,
I went through the steps of forgiveness. That in Aramaic, the word forgive is shabag. It means to cancel. And it's the goals that I hold that cause my mind to use certain data to produce my mind's constructs. When I cancel the goal, that construct collapses, and that's when I get to look at what's underneath the surface, what's in the unconscious. And so there are several videos where we've walked somebody through that process. We'll just take it and put it to work and see what it opens for you.
Okay, sure. One other thing you mentioned in the video was you said leave everything that you want.
Well, again,
are they material possessions? Like, what do you mean about that?
Okay. So the quote from the Course, and where it parallels the Aramaic on how forgiveness works, quote in the Course says, let go of all the things you think you want. That means your goals, that you cancel a goal. Your trifling treasure, the Course talks about a goal as being a trifling treasure. If you want something other than to function as a true human being and discover the truth of who you are, oh, I want them to do this for me, I have a goal. And if I have a history that people don't do that for me, maybe I'm sad or I'm in fear or I'm in rage about it, the way I clean up my sadness, my fear, or my rage is by canceling the goal, letting go of what it is I think I want. And what that does is it collapses the output of the perceptual mind. When that collapses, it collapses in on itself, and it gives me access to the unconscious part, what's beneath the surface. So that's the forgiveness process. And when you can, access one of the worksheet processes, or you can go to my website, whyagain.org, and if you go to the upper left-hand corner of the website, there's a link that says Start Here. If you click that, It'll take you to everything about forgiveness, but in particular, there are about 20 different, we do a radio show 5 days a week, and there are about 20 different radio shows where we've walked somebody through the whole forgiveness process. And so you can listen to those and get some instruction on how that forgiveness process works. But that's what I was referring to. And
Thank you so much.
glad to be here. Glad you're here. Glad you're here to share it. Pass it on to somebody else. Anyone else?
One last question.
Go for it.
Knowing a lot of things like this, what is excited for you at the moment? Because they're a very high level of wisdom. So anything excites you in your life?
Several things. Yes, actually, I have a granddaughter that's 4, and we raise her 2 to 3 days a week. And she's been teaching me, I knew I was doing this work when I had my children, and I knew to a certain degree what being a father was about. But now being her grandfather, she's taught me a whole lot more about what being a parent, that my real job is to uncover the truth about myself as love and to see only that in her, no matter what she does. To be the space of love and to attune to her as the essence of love, so that she can consciously create an expression, a vehicle through which to express the truth about who she is. That's one of the most exciting things in my life. And besides that, the last 4 years or so, since we stopped traveling, my wife and I have been on the road for decades. We traveled 6 to 10 months of the year. Well, we don't do that anymore. And so we've gotten into building soil and gardening and just adding a whole other dimension to the work. And that is that the nutritional aspect, that is the only way to really solidify or bring this energy system to its highest levels of vitality. And then beyond that, our commitment is to take this work to every mind, heart, and being on the planet. When Yinka contacted me and said, hey, we're doing this book. And I said, okay, well, I'm part of it. I'm here. And our commitment is to make this available literally to every mind, heart, and being on the planet. And the other thing that really excites me is the opportunity to keep doing layer upon layer upon layer of my own interpersonal work. I had an experience back, it's probably getting close to a year ago now. I was doing still point breathing process that we teach. And I was instructed, I'm laying there with my eyes closed, breathing, and I was instructed to look down. I looked down, and what I was shown was a field of darkness so vast that I couldn't comprehend it. And throughout that field of darkness, there were spots of light, like an uncountable, unfathomable number of lights in that darkness. And I asked, what is this? What am I looking at? And what I was shown, what I was told, these were my ancestors and the darkness that they were locked in. And that they were asking me if I would assist them in processing through that darkness. And so that's created another layer of motivation for me. And that's another thing that I'm very excited about, that I realize that I am actually creating the space of support and processing out the darkness that, and from that experience, realizing these were ancestors that weren't in bodies anymore, that it seemed like there wasn't much they could do about it, not being in a body, and that being in a body was the opportunity to do it. And so that's another thing that's exciting to me, is that I'm more and more learning to be able to capture that energy, bring it to the presence of love, and process not only them, but my own genes and my own family system through it. And of course, when we do that, we're doing, there's a wonderful principle in the Course that says, when you are healed, you are never healed alone. That you're opening a space for everybody on the planet who has similar issues. So there's some of the things that excite me. Besides, I just celebrated my 18th anniversary with my wife, and we had an awesome dinner 2 nights ago. And, we have an eternal commitment in our relationship, and just the things that are growing personally, interpersonally with us, the work we're doing together and individually, is pretty, for me, is pretty dramatic and pretty cool, pretty sweet. So there's some of the things happening in my world.
From the cognitive perspective, there is 21 days to see the new habit. So you were also in the video mentioned that it takes long time to do the healing of ancestrals. So how long?
Well, I use an analogy. Let's imagine I've got a 100-gallon barrel of water, and I have a hose on it. And somebody says, well, Michael, how long is it going to take to empty the barrel? Well, is the hose wide open? The barrel might be empty in 3 minutes. Am I pinching the hose and drinking a drip? It might take 100 years. Willingness is the key. How willing am I as an energy system? You know, it's interesting, in the Aramaic language, they talked about a thing called Satan, and the Greeks interpreted Satan as some kind of a creature that's out to get us and destroy us. But actually in Aramaic, the word Satan means the resistor, one who misleads. Most people in the world today live literally, in the Aramaic sense of the word, trapped in Satan. You ask them to be responsible for what's going on inside them, and they've got all kinds of stories about why they're not responsible, and it's all somebody else's stuff that they're feeling, and they, so they go into resistance to ownership of it, and then they have a whole story about why it's somebody else's. If one lives trapped there, it can take a long. Developing willingness is what lets the energy system open for that release. But in the state where people belong to what I've come to call the one world universal religion of blame, it's all somebody else's fault, it's theirs that I'm feeling, it can take a long time. The more we open to, oh, this is what's moving inside of me, it's mine, the faster it moves. I know that for me, things that in the early days of doing this work that were traumas for me to work through, I might take 2, 3, 4 days to move through something. And I realize now that I have things come up that maybe are 10 times as strong as that was way back then, and I could be done with it in 30 seconds. So my take is that, you know, with practice, we develop the skill and the ability to throw the garbage out. And when I'm willing to take responsibility and ownership and let go of the resistance, then things move much faster. So it's all dependent on where do you stand with that? If you stand in resistance, if you stand in projection, if you are a member of the one world religion of blame, it's all somebody else's fault. It's going to take a long time.
No, I'm not. I am not that.
Yeah. No suggestion that you are. I'm just saying, in a general way, that would be the principle.
Thank you.
Yeah. Delighted.
We haven't got any more hands up.
Okay. Well, great session. Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Yes.
It was fun to listen to it with you again. I'm sure that the energy of what you saw bouncing off of your mind helped to open some new spaces in my mind. So I got another level of understanding of my own lesson here, and appreciate each and every one of you and the questions you bring. You know, there's a story about Albert Einstein, and they asked him, if you were given a problem to solve and you had 1 hour to solve it or you would die, what would you do? And Einstein said, I would spend 55 minutes getting to the point of understanding the question that needed to be asked, and then I would answer that question in 5 minutes. So the questions that come, being able to question, for me, one of the benefits of doing this work and interacting with people all over the globe is I get to interact with, for instance, with yourself, your refined questions, and that opens spaces for me to new levels of understanding. So thank you for allowing me to be part of facilitating this.